The night Elara Voss lost her job, she celebrated. Not because she wanted to lose it. She'd spent 4 years building her client base at the architecture firm, had just landed a waterfront condo project in Victoria, and had been 3 months away from making senior associate. She celebrated because it was a Friday, because her best friend Juno had booked a table at a rooftop bar in downtown Vancouver, and because for one night, Elara wanted to stop being the girl who stayed late. She remembered the music being too loud and the air tasting like someone else's perfume. She remembered laughing at something Juno said. She remembered her phone buzzing twice in her coat pocket and ignoring it both times. She didn't know, standing on that rooftop with a glass of wine going warm in her hand, that her father had already made a decision about the rest of her life. Her father, Gerald, everyone called him Gerald, even her mother, even Elara when she was small and couldn't quite get the syllables right, was the kind of man who believed he knew best. Not in an aggressive way, in a quiet, immovable way, like a wall that never raised its voice. He'd built a logistics company from a warehouse in Burnaby into something that had offices in Calgary and Halifax. He was not cruel, he was simply certain. Elara's mother, Roslyn, had learned to work around that certainty the way water works around rock. Elara had spent her whole life watching her mother redirect, soften, translate. She'd told herself she would never do the same. She got home late. The lights in the kitchen were on, which meant her father was still up, which meant something was wrong. Gerald Voss did not wait up for people unless he had a reason. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea he hadn't touched. Roslyn was beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes doing that thing where they apologize before anyone said a word. "Sit down," Gerald said. Elara sat. He told her that he'd been talking to an old business associate, a man named Hugh Whitmore. Hugh had a son, 36, ran the family property development company since Hugh's health had declined. Very well regarded, very responsible. The Whitmore family had a history with Gerald's family that went back further than Elara knew about, and Gerald felt it was time to honor that history. Elara waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. "Dad," she said carefully, "what exactly are you telling me?" "I've agreed that you'll meet Callum Whitmore." "You've agreed, as more than a social introduction. The families have discussed this." Elara looked at her mother. Roslyn looked at the table. "I have a job," Elara said. "I have a life. I have a project in Victoria that starts in 6 weeks. I am not. Dad, I'm 31. You can't just—" "Your firm called me," Gerald said. "This afternoon. They told me you've been struggling with the Harrington account. That there were complaints." The floor tilted slightly under Elara's feet. "What?" "I spoke to your director. Martin, is it? We've worked something out. You're taking a leave of absence." She stared at him. "You called my director. I sorted it." "You sorted." She stopped. Started again. "You went to my workplace, behind my back, and told them I was taking a leave of absence." "It's already done, Elara." She sat with that for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Her mother's hands stayed folded. The thing was, Elara knew what struggling with the Harrington account meant. Martin had mentioned it once, a passing comment about client communication style. She'd thought it was handled. She hadn't known her father was watching. She hadn't known there was anything to watch. "When do I meet him?" she said finally. "Not a question. Sunday." She looked up Callum Whitmore that night, lying on top of her bed with her laptop balanced on her knees. There wasn't much. A LinkedIn profile with a formal headshot, dark suit, short dark hair, the kind of expression that didn't give anything away. The Whitmore Group had a website with a lot of language about community-centered development and sustainable urban projects. There were a few articles in business publications. His name appeared near the bottom of press releases, never in quotes. He didn't have social media, or if he did, it wasn't findable. Juno called at midnight. Elara told her everything. "Okay," Juno said when Elara finished. "Okay, so your dad genuinely, yes, and your job is just, apparently." Juno was quiet for a second. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet." "What are you going to do?" Elara closed the laptop. "I'm going to meet a stranger on Sunday because apparently that's my life now." The Whitmore house was not what she expected. She'd imagined something that announced itself. Gates, a long driveway, the kind of architecture that was trying to make a point. What she found was a house in West Vancouver that sat quietly among old Douglas firs, cedar siding weathered to silver, windows that let in a lot of sky. It was beautiful in the way things are beautiful when they're not trying to be. Her father drove. Roslyn sat in the front seat and talked about the scenery. Elara sat in the back and watched the neighborhood go by and thought about the Victoria project and whether Martin had already given it to someone else. Hugh Whitmore met them at the door. He was a tall man in his 60s, thinner than his photographs suggested, with the kind of handshake that had once been firm and was learning to be gentler. He welcomed them warmly. He offered coffee. He led them through a living room with a wall of windows overlooking the inlet. Callum was not in the room. They sat. They made conversation. Hugh asked Elara about her architecture work with the kind of genuine interest that surprised her. Her father talked about the logistics company. Rosalind admired a painting above the fireplace. 20 minutes passed. Then Hugh said, "I should tell you something before Callum comes in. I should have said it before you made the drive." The room shifted slightly, the way rooms do when someone is about to say something that changes things. "Callum was in an accident," Hugh said. 14 months ago. A construction site. One of our projects, an oversight we're still dealing with the consequences of. He was there when a section of scaffolding failed. He paused. He hasn't walked since. Elara heard her father make a sound. She didn't look at him. "He uses a wheelchair," Hugh continued. He's doing well, all things considered. He works. He manages the company. He's at the office most days. But I wanted you to know before you met him, because I should have told you sooner and I didn't, and that was wrong of me." He looked at Gerald. "I'm sorry, my friend. I should have told you months ago." Gerald said nothing for a long moment. Then, "It doesn't change anything." Elara finally looked at her father. "For me," Gerald said. "It doesn't change anything for me. The families have discussed this. My word stands." He looked at Elara. "It doesn't change anything." She didn't know, in that moment, whether to be furious or moved or both. She was saved from having to respond by the sound of wheels on hardwood. Callum Whitmore came around the corner of the hallway and stopped when he saw the room full of people. He had his father's dark eyes and something quieter in his expression. Not shyness, exactly. More like someone who had learned to read a room before entering it. "I didn't know we'd started," he said, looking at Hugh. "I was just introducing everyone." Callum looked at Elara. She looked back. Neither of them said anything for a beat too long. "Callum," Hugh said. "This is Elara Vossis." "I know who she is," Callum said. He didn't say it unkindly. He crossed to the seating area and positioned himself across from Elara, with the ease of someone who had stopped being self-conscious about logistics. "My dad's been talking about you for 3 months. I feel like I know your whole CV." "He's been talking about you too," Elara said. Callum glanced at Hugh. "All good things, I hope." "He didn't mention the accident," she said before she could stop herself. The room went very still. Rosalind made a small noise. Gerald's jaw tightened. But Callum just looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "He tends not to lead with that." They were left alone after an hour, which Elara suspected was the point of the whole exercise. Hugh took Gerald and Rosalind on a tour of the garden, a garden that, from the size of the house, could not possibly require an hour to view. And Elara and Callum were left with 2 cups of coffee and the sound of the inlet through the open window. "You don't want to be here," Callum said. It wasn't an accusation. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She looked at him. He was watching her with that same steady attention, like he was waiting to see what she'd actually say rather than what she thought she was supposed to. "My dad called my workplace," she said. "He had me put on a leave of absence without telling me. Then he told me I was meeting you." "That's Gerald Voss," Callum said, with something that might have been faint amusement. "My dad's known him for 30 years. He said Gerald once reorganized an entire supply chain because someone told him it couldn't be done." "He does that," Elara said. "He decides something is the right thing and then he just moves everything around until it fits. And you're the thing he moved." "Yeah." Callum turned his coffee cup in his hands. "For what it's worth, I didn't know he was going to call your firm. I would have told him not to." She studied him. "Did you know about this arrangement? Before it was arranged?" "My dad suggested it. I said no twice. He wore me down. A beat. He's good at that. So you also don't want to be here." "I didn't say that either." That almost made her smile. "I'm just saying," Callum continued, "that I'm 36 and I didn't exactly picture meeting someone this way. But here we are." He glanced at the garden door. "And our parents are going to be out there for at least another 40 minutes, so we might as well be honest with each other." Elara leaned back in her chair. "Okay," she said. "Honest, you looked me up last night." "Obviously. What did you find?" "Not much. LinkedIn, some press releases. A company website that uses the word sustainable 11 times. He made a face. "I know. I keep asking the marketing team to tone it down. You're quieter than I expected. You're more direct than I expected." They looked at each other. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't strange," Elara said. "It is. My whole life got reorganized by my father, and now I'm sitting in a stranger's house in West Vancouver having coffee. I know. But I'm here," she said. "So, what do you actually want to know about me?" Something in his expression changed, just slightly, like something that had been braced relaxed a fraction. "Tell me about the project in Victoria," he said. The one your dad probably screwed up for you. She stared at him. I told you, he said. Hugh's been talking about you for 3 months. Waterfront condo development, sustainable design focus, junior lead. Elara laughed. It surprised her, the realness of it. I was 3 months from making senior associate, she said. I know. And now I'm on a leave of absence. I know that too. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. That was real work. You shouldn't have lost it. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected to feel, in that moment, that someone in this entire situation was actually on her side. The arrangement, as both families called it, was that Elara would spend time at the Whitmore house over the following weeks. There was no formal proposal, no timeline, nothing so clear-cut as a plan. It was presented, by both Gerald and Hugh, as simply getting to know each other. Elara did not go home with her father that night. She told Gerald she needed some air and asked Rosalind to text her later, and then she sat on the deck overlooking the inlet after everyone had gone inside. And she thought about the Victoria project, and she thought about Martin's face when she'd last seen him, and she thought about what it felt like to have someone look at you and say, simply, that shouldn't have happened to you. She texted Juno. It's complicated. Juno texted back. Of course it is. Are you okay? I think so, Elara replied. He's not what I expected. She came back on Thursday. Not because her father told her to. She came because she'd been sitting in her apartment for 3 days, looking at her drafting software and not opening any files. And because Callum had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the Whitmore Group's current project in North Vancouver was dealing with a drainage issue that their site engineer couldn't solve, and would she be interested in taking a look? It wasn't a job offer, it was a question, she went. The project was a mid-rise residential development in the lower reaches of the North Shore. And the drainage problem was genuinely interesting. A grade change that hadn't been properly accounted for in the original site plan. Elara spent an hour walking the site with Callum and a very tired-looking engineer named Brett, and by the time they got back to the trailer, she had 3 possible solutions sketched on the back of a site plan. Brett looked at the sketches and said, "Oh, that's it." Callum looked at her with something she couldn't quite read. Where did the third one come from? The grade near the property line. You're not going to fix the drainage from the inside if the runoff source is outside. Brett's team has been on this for 6 weeks. Brett's team was looking at the wrong thing. Brett generously did not appear offended. On the drive back to the Whitmore house, Callum was quiet for a long stretch. Then he said, "My dad didn't tell Gerald you could have this. He should have." Elara looked at him. "What?" "This," he said, meaning the sketches, meaning the solution, meaning the hour on site. "This is what you actually are." He talked about your job like it was a nice thing you did before real life started. He should have said, "This is what she's going to lose if we do this wrong." Elara stared out the passenger window for a moment. The North Shore mountains were doing something complicated with the evening light. "Why are you saying this?" she asked. "Because I want you to know I see it," Callum said. "What you are. What this cost you." She didn't answer. She didn't know how to. The weeks developed a rhythm she hadn't anticipated. Tuesday and Thursday mornings at the North Vancouver site, which had expanded from drainage to a broader consultation that Brett had stopped pretending was temporary. Callum would come out when he could, which was most days, and they would walk the site, he in a chair that handled rougher terrain than she'd initially assumed, moving through gravel and temporary boardwalk with a practicality that made her stop noticing it within the first week. And she would explain what she was seeing. And he would ask questions that cut to the center of things with an efficiency that reminded her of her best professors. He had, she discovered, studied civil engineering before he'd come back to run the family company. He'd spent 2 years in Calgary working on infrastructure projects before Hugh's first health scare had brought him home. He knew what she was talking about. He was not looking for her to translate. They had dinner at the house twice a week, usually with Hugh present for part of it, sometimes just the two of them. She learned that he read constantly, histories, mostly, and a specific kind of architecture writing that she'd never expected to find in a property developer's house. She learned that he had a dry precision to his humor that appeared without warning and made her lose her train of thought. She learned that he had been engaged before the accident to a woman named Dana who had ended things 8 months after the scaffolding fell, and that he had told exactly 3 people this, and that she was now the 4th. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because you'll figure it out eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me." She thought about that. Then, did you love her? Yes. Did she love you? A beat. I think she loved who she thought I was going to be. Elara sat with that for a long time. The call came on a Wednesday morning in October, 6 weeks after the Sunday, she'd sat in the Whitmore living room and first heard the sound of wheels on hardwood. It was her uncle, her father's younger brother, a man named Philip, who lived in Ontario and called approximately twice a year. He was calling from a lawyer's office in Toronto. He told her that their grandfather, Gerald's father, a man who'd built a small construction empire in British Columbia in the 1960s, had left a significant portion of his estate in a trust for Gerald's children, not Gerald himself. His children. The trust had matured. Elara was the only one. She had been aware, in a distant way, that her grandfather had money. She had not been aware of how much, or that it had been earmarked for her specifically, or that Gerald had apparently been managing the trust as executor, and had not in the past year mentioned it to Elara at all. She called Juno first, because she needed to say it out loud before she could believe it. Then she called her mother. Rosalind was quiet for too long, then she said, "I told him to tell you. Last spring. I told him, Elara, she needs to know. Mom, he said he wanted to wait until you were settled. Until you had a plan. He wanted to wait until I was married," Elara said. Rosalind didn't answer. Elara sat on the floor of her apartment kitchen. She didn't know how she'd gotten to the floor. She'd been standing at the counter and looked at the ceiling. "He arranged all of this," she said. It wasn't a question. He arranged all of this, and the whole time he was the executor of Grandpa Voss's estate, and he was sitting on money that was meant for me. Elara. He pulled me out of my job, Mom. He called Martin. He set up this hole. I've been walking around thinking he did this because he believed it was best for me in the whole time. He does believe it's best for you, Rosalind said. It sounded like it cost her something to say. He also has reasons that aren't about you. He's always been that way. He solves everything in one move. Elara sat on the kitchen floor for a long time after she hung up. She drove to the Whitmore house without calling first. Hugh answered the door and looked at her face and said, "He's in the study," and stepped aside. Callum was at his desk when she came in, a site plan spread out in front of him, his phone pressed to his ear. He saw her expression and ended the call without saying goodbye. "What happened?" he said. She told him. He listened without moving, without saying anything, his hands flat on the desk. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Did you know?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. "It came out anyway." "No." He met her eyes. "Elara, no. My father told me about the Voss family trust in the abstract, that your grandfather had provided for Gerald's children. He didn't say Gerald was sitting on it. He didn't say that was any part of this." She believed him. She didn't know if she believed Hugh. "I need to talk to a lawyer," she said. "Yes, today. I know someone," Callum said. He was already picking up his phone. "Family law and estate. She's very good. Do you want me to come with you?" Elara looked at him, at the site plan, at the phone in his hand already dialing. "You were in the middle of something," she said. "Elara." "Yes," she said. "Come with me." The lawyer, a woman named Pryor, who worked out of an office in Yaletown and wore the expression of someone who had heard everything and was still mildly interested, went through the trust documents for 90 minutes. She asked Elara careful questions. She asked Callum nothing, because he was there not as a party to any of this, but simply because Elara had not wanted to sit in a lawyer's office alone. At the end of 90 minutes, Pryor set down her pen. "Your grandfather," she said, "was quite specific. The trust instrument grants you full access on your 32nd birthday, which is..." She checked the document, 4 months away. "Your father, as executor, was obligated to notify you of the trust's existence when you turn 25. There is a 7-year window in which that notification did not occur." Elara's 31st birthday had been in March. "He was 6 years late," she said. "At minimum," Pryor said. "What does that mean?" "For him." Pryor looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. "Executor misconduct is a serious matter in British Columbia. You have options. Do you want to hear them?" Elara looked at the trust documents. At her grandfather's handwriting on the original instrument, an old man's careful cursive, the kind of handwriting that had learned on a pen nib. He had built something and he had wanted it to go to her. She had never known. "Yes," she said. "I want to hear them." She didn't go home. She went to the Whitmore house and sat in the kitchen while Hugh made tea that nobody asked for. And she thought about her father's face on that Sunday night, certain and immovable, rearranging her life with the confidence of a man who believed he'd do exactly what he was doing. Hugh sat across from her. He looked older than he had in September. He looked like someone who had something to say and wasn't sure if he was allowed. "I didn't know about the trust," he said. "Not the details. I know. If I had known Gerald was managing it and hadn't told you, I wouldn't have." He stopped. "I still thought this could be good for both of you. I still believe that. But I wouldn't have done it this way." Elara looked at him. "Why did you want this? For Callum?" Hugh was quiet for a moment, because after Dana left he stopped letting people in. Not dramatically. He just pulled back. He still works. He still goes out, but he stopped expecting anything. He looked at his tea. I just wanted him to expect something again. Callum, who had come in partway through this, said from the doorway, "Dad, I know," Hugh said. "I know, son." Elara looked between them. She thought about sitting on a kitchen floor that morning, the ceiling blurring slightly. She thought about Callum ending a phone call the moment he saw her face. She thought about a site plan and 3 possible solutions sketched on the back of a page, and someone saying, "This is what you actually are." She thought about her grandfather's handwriting. She picked up her tea. "I'm going to deal with my dad," she said, "and it's going to be hard, and then I'm going to figure out what comes next." She looked at Callum. "But I'm not leaving." The kitchen was quiet. "Okay," Callum said. "I mean it. I know you do." She met with Gerald 3 days later, at the house in Burnaby, with Rosalind present and a folder of documents Pryor had prepared. Gerald looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at his daughter. She had prepared for anger, for the particular kind of certainty he used as a shield. What she hadn't prepared for was the thing that crossed his face when he finally put the folder down. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like a man who understood that he had gone too far and was not sure how to live with that. "I thought," he started. "I know what you thought," Elara said. "I was trying to. I know." She kept her voice even. "It took considerable effort, but it wasn't yours to decide. The money wasn't yours. My job wasn't yours. My life isn't yours to reorganize, Dad." He was quiet. "I'm not taking legal action," she said. "Not yet. But the trust transfers to my control 4 months early by agreement, or I will." She watched his face. "And you're going to call Martin and tell him that the leave of absence was a mistake, and that I'm available to return, Elara." "I mean it." Rosalind very quietly said, "Gerald." He looked at his wife. Something passed between them that Elara had seen 1,000 times but never understood. Her mother not redirecting, not translating, just looking. Gerald closed the folder. "All right," he said. Martin was surprised to hear from her. Then, once she explained the situation with careful omissions, he was contrite. Then he mentioned, almost apologetically, that the Victoria project was still technically unassigned because the developer had delayed and did she want it back. She said yes. She called Callum from the parking lot. "I got the project back," she said. She heard him exhale. "Good." And the trust conversation went better than expected. How much better? He backed down. Gerald Davos backed down. "I brought documentation." Callum laughed. A real one. Not the dry precision she'd gotten used to, but something warmer and less controlled. It sounded like something that hadn't happened easily in a long time. "The drainage fix worked, by the way," he said when he stopped. "Brett's team signed off this morning." "I know. Brett texted me." "Of course he did." A pause. "Are you coming Thursday?" She looked at the parking lot. The mountains behind the North Shore were already losing the light. "Yeah," she said. "I'll be there Thursday." She stood there a moment longer after she hung up, the phone warm in her hand, the evening air coming in off the water. She had thought 6 weeks ago that her life had been taken from her. Her job, her timeline, her sense of what came next. She had sat in the back of her father's car and watched the neighborhood go by and thought about a project in Victoria and whether Martin had already given it to someone else. It turned out her grandfather had been watching out for her all along, in the patient way of old men who know they won't be there to see how things unfold. He'd built something, and he'd put her name on it, and he'd trusted that eventually she'd find out. She thought about his handwriting, the careful cursive, the specific weight of a man who'd made something real and wanted it to last. She got in her car. She had a site plan to revise and a Thursday to get to, and somewhere on the other side of all of it, a waterfront project in Victoria waiting for her to come back and finish what she'd started.